And another method in the methodology of culturology is typological method, and this method identifies the typological proximity of the elements of the historical and cultural process. And also there is the method of comparative historical method, here we should say about comparison of original cultural units in the historical context and penetration into their essence. And another method in the methodology of culturology is the structural semiotic method. So this method identifies and studies the basic structures of culture and different types of their dynamics. And semiotics itself is the study of signs and sign using behavior. So this method has its goal on signs and symbols of different cultures. The diachronic method is the comparison of different cultural units or threads in time, and the opposite method to the diachronic method is the synchronic method, and this method is based on the comparison of simultaneously existing cultural units. So we can distinguish the diachronic method with the synchronic method. So the diachronic method deals with the development of cultures in history, but the synchronic method studies cultures at that moment without its historical conditions. And another method is the structural functional method, and it involves the decomposition of the studied object of culture into its component parts and the identification of the internal connection, relationship and dependence. So this method investigates culture as the structure of the different elements, and also the functional part of the method deals with the functions of culture in a society and in historical progress. Another method in the methodology of culturology is phenomenological method. So it's the method that describes, orders, facts and cultural phenomena in accordance with their natural interdependence. So phenomenology is a modern science, is a modern discipline within the structure of philosophy, and the father of phenomenology was Edmund Husserl, after him this method became the principle in methodology of philosophy and history and culturology too. So the purpose of the phenomenological method is to describe, not explain, and reproduce the facts of culture as they appear in observation. And another method is the functional method. It studies the functions that a certain cultural phenomenon plays in a given society, and also we can distinguish within the research methods of culturology the evolutionary method. This method considers the dynamics of culture as a consistent chain of continuous changes and the development from the lower forms to the higher forms. And also there are such special methods, for example the biosphere approach. Some scientists say about the biosphere approach and this approach is distinguished by a global understanding of the problems of culture. For example, the biosphere approach understands our planet as a single, all-encompassing system, an integral part of which are humans and human society and their cultures. With this approach, culture is interpreted as a natural result of the development of nature, so there is an opportunity of cultural analysis in terms of the role it plays on our planet and possibly in the whole universe. So the biosphere approach describes culture as a whole system with the connection with the nature, with our planet and the universe. The psychological method is an approach that orientates the researcher to the study of the subjective mechanism of cultural activity and individual qualities and also unconscious mental processes. So this method is very important in studies of the peculiarities of national cultures and human behavior in culture and with the questions of mentality. The systematic approach studies the culture of each people as a whole, where all elements of the system are interconnected and create, due to these connections, certain properties of the system as a whole. So study of these properties within the frame of the systematic approach allows us to give a general definition of a particular culture. And also this approach allows us to study a given culture by showing it in the present moment in time, in the entirety of its connections and relationships, to compare it with other social phenomena and to understand it as one of the most important aspects of the life of society. There are such kind of methods as interdisciplinary methods, and these methods are used by both the humanities and natural sciences. So within the framework of cultural studies, we can apply the synergetic method, which was proposed by Ilya Prigozhin. The synergetic method is an interdisciplinary direction of scientific research, and its main task is to understand the general laws and principles that underlie the processes of self-organization in systems of a very different nature, including socio-cultural. And during this approach, culture is described as an open system which has its connection with the environment, with other cultures, with other elements of society, with the environment as a whole. And this method forms a view about the alternative and polyvariant ways of the development of complex and open systems. And in culturology, there are also three major theoretical approaches towards the interpretation of culture. And firstly, it's a functionalist perspective, acknowledges that there are many parts of culture that work together as a system to fulfill society's needs. So this perspective describes culture due to its functions and due to its role in society. Conflict theorists see culture as inherently unequal based upon such factors like different genders, class, race and age. The last approach is an interactionist perspective, and this perspective is primarily interested in culture as experienced in the daily interactions between individuals and the symbols that comprise a culture. Now I would like to talk about the main tasks of culturology, about the main goals of culturology, and we can distinguish such tasks as analysis of culture as a system of cultural phenomena. So here culture presents a system of different elements. Another task is identification of connection types between elements of culture, and also one of the main tasks of culturology is the study of the typology of cultures and cultural units. Another task is solution of problems of socio-cultural dynamics, and the latter is the research of cultural codes and communication. So the subject of culturology is not the study of individual phenomena, of individual parts of culture, but a systematic study of the processes of genesis and morphology of culture, its structure, essence, and content of culture, its typology, language, and dynamics. And in our course, we have such topics as dynamics of culture and typology of culture and language and symbolic nature of culture, of different cultures. And also there is the part about the content of culture, and this part is called history of cultures. And culturology as a science can be divided into two big and fundamental parts. As first part is theoretical or fundamental culturology, and the second part is applied culturology. And what is theoretical or fundamental culturology? It consists of such levels of such sciences as philosophy of culture, history of culture, anthropology of culture, and sociology of culture. And theory of culture, the theoretical part of culturology explores the phenomena related to this field of knowledge and the theoretical and philosophical levels. And the theory of culture develops conceptual apparatus and its own research methods and its own research methodology. And what is philosophy of culture? This term, philosophy of culture, was originally introduced at the beginning of the 19th century by the German philosopher Adam Müller, and the section of theoretical culturology as philosophy of culture examines the concept and essence and the structure of culture, determines its function in society. So we can say that this section of theoretical culturology deals with the most fundamental problems, the most fundamental questions about culture, and therefore the philosophy of culture performs methodological functions in relation to culturology. This is its basis and the first section of theoretical cultural studies. And we can see that culturology as a science arose in the middle of the 20th century. However, as a separate branch of knowledge, it began to form at the end of the 19th century by separating it from the philosophy of culture. So culturology appeared as the part of philosophy of culture. And another element of the theoretical culturology is history of culture. And history of culture investigates the real process of the continuity of cultural development of different eras, countries, nations and peoples and other social groups. And also history of culture gives rich material testifying to the diversity of cultural achievements, the contribution of peoples to the world culture of mankind. And of course, history of culture itself forms knowledge about our cultural heritage, about searches and discoveries in history, about monuments of material and spiritual culture, and also about values and norms of lives, traditions, ideals and symbols of different peoples. History of culture also explores the origin and sources of cultural phenomena, the process of their spread. And we can say that history of culture is also the principal and fundamental level of culturology. And the scientific basis for these directions were laid by the German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder. So he was the father, he was the originator of history of culture. And another section of theoretical culturology is sociology of culture. And sociology of culture examines the process of culture functioning in society, tendencies of socio-cultural development manifested in our consciousness, behavior and the lifestyle of various social groups. And culture in the sociological field is analyzed as the ways of thinking and describing and acting and the material object that together shape a group of people's way of life. And the second part of culturology is applied culturology. So this part of the science explores its individual areas, such as political, economic, artistic, religious spheres, in order to design, predict, and regulate the relevant processes. And the applied field of study, as a rule, has an outlet to the practical field of human activity. So this part of culturology deals with activities of humanity and does not deal with the theoretical part as fundamental culturology. So this applied or empirical culturology has its representation on cultural policy, the functions of cultural institutions, namely on the organization and technology of the cultural life of society, on the activities of cultural institutions, cultural leisure centers, amateur and initiative associations of interests, and also it deals with the methodology for holding mass holidays and festivals and forums. And So we can distinguish the most important areas of scientific and practical activity of applied culturology, the same as identifying, meeting, and consistently raising the socio-cultural interests and the needs of various groups of the population. And also another important area is the formation of methods for their implementation. We can talk about development of federal, regional, and departmental cultural programs and social technologies for their implementation. And other most important areas of scientific and practical activity of applied or empirical culturology deal with the stimulation of innovative movements in the field of culture, also its management of economic and legal mechanisms for creating a cultural environment and organizing social and cultural activities in a society. And also it's about involvement of various groups of the population in cultural and aesthetic creativity. The last one is legal, personnel, and methodological support of various forms of social and artistic, scientific and technical creativity of the individual and the population. Now I would like to talk about the schools of cultural anthropology. So it's a section of theoretical culturology that explores the relationship between man and culture, and we can say about such main approaches in culturology and in cultural anthropology, and these approaches formed in the second half of the 19th century, we can say about evolutionism, diffusionism, structuralism and functionalism. They are the most fundamental approaches in culturology. So evolutionism, its representatives are in England Edward Tyler and Herbert Spencer, James Fraser, and also there are such representatives in France and in the USA as Charles Letourneur and Lewis Morgan. Tyler was an English prominent anthropologist, the founder of cultural anthropology, and he maintained that all societies passed through three basic stages of development. So we can say about evolutionism of humanity from savagery through barbarism to civilization. And Tyler asserts that the human mind and its capabilities are the same globally, despite a particular society stage in social evolution. So this means that, for example, a hunter-gatherer society would possess the same amount of intelligence as an advanced industrial society with its high level of technology and science. And the difference, Tyler asserts, is education, which he considers the cumulative knowledge and methodology that takes thousands of years to acquire. There are such main features of evolutionism as the theory of culturology. So the first feature is the idea of the unity of the human race and the uniformity of development of cultures. Another idea is the one-line development of human culture from a simple to the complex. And the third idea is the obligatory allocation of separate stages of development for the whole society. And also there is the idea of universal human progress and historical optimism. Another main feature of evolutionism is educational rationalistic ideal of the future development of cultures. And the last one is the psychological substantiation of cultural phenomena and often derivation of the laws of society development from mental individual properties. And James Fraser was a Scottish social anthropologist, and he was a representative of evolutionism too. And Fraser believed that over time culture passed through also three stages, including magic, the stage of religion, and the last stage is the stage of science, scientific reason. So Fraser believed that magic and science were similar because both shared an emphasis on experimentation and our practice. For example, magic was the first form of practical activity, of practical investigation and formation of our world in the types of mythological societies. And science has the same role in our modern society, and the role of science also links with the practical formation and practical development of our world. And Fraser noted that magic sometimes returned so as to become science. For example, as alchemy underwent a revival in early modern Europe and became chemistry in the period of the Middle Ages. And on the other hand, Fraser displayed deep anxiety about the potential of widespread belief in magic to empower the masses. And another theoretical approach is diffusionism. And the origin of the theory of diffusionism is associated with the name of the German scientist Friedrich Ratzel, a German scientist of the 19th century. And the main factors in the development of culture are associated with borrowing, transfer, mixing of its elements according to diffusionism. And the movement of cultures affects not only objects of material life, but also spiritual phenomena like myths, cults, customs, religious beliefs, aesthetics values, etc. And in his concept of culture, Ratzel assigned a secondary role to man as the bearer of ethnographic objects. And he considered culture to be relatively independent of man. And structuralism is the third approach in culturology, and this approach was founded by Claude Lévi-Strauss in his main works, such as structural anthropology and totemism. And Claude Lévi-Strauss was a French anthropologist and ethnologist whose work was key in the development of the theories of structuralism and structural anthropology. and he has been called, alongside James Frazer, the father of modern anthropology. And his approach, structuralism, was fundamental in philosophy also. And in this approach, culture can be viewed as a world of science, with the help of which social information is preserved and accumulated in human society, or in other words, how the world of social information stored and accumulated using iconic means created by people. In this approach, Levi-Strauss interpreted culture as a logical structure of the unconscious, and according to his point of view, all societies are variants of one society, but expressed in different ways. And the task of the scientist is to identify the structures of the unconscious, which is the basis of regularity. So this structure is a set of stable connections and relationships between values, between religious beliefs, between ethical norms and mores. Such norms, ceremonies, rituals are a kind of language of a particular culture, and Levi-Strauss mentioned that all cultures have such elements as rituals and beliefs and mores. And Levi-Strauss also investigated the logic of primitive thinking and showed that it differs little from scientific logic. So reason, in his opinion, is a property of culture itself and all its manifestations. And now we can remind James Frazer with his idea about the unity of all cultures in the world. And Levi-Strauss also argued that the savage mind had the same structures as the civilized mind, and that human characteristics are the same everywhere. And another approach is called functionalism, and the emergence of functionalism as a way to study culture is connected with the works of British researchers and theoreticians Bronislaw Malinowski and Alfred Radcliffe Brown. We can stress that the peculiarity of this approach is to consider culture as a holistic formation, or a set consisting of elements and parts. And here the most important tasks of the research is the decomposition of the whole, which is culture, into its component parts, and the identification of the existing connections between them, and identification of their functions in culture. So, moreover, each element of the set is studied not as a random formation or a relic, but as performing a specific task or function within a single whole, within a whole culture. They say that, like a biological organism, a society is able to maintain its essential processes through the way that the different parts interact. And different institutions such as religion, kinship, and the economy were the organs, and individuals were the cells in this social organism. And on the whole, sociocultural systems function to provide their members with adaptations to environmental circumstances, and to connect them in a network of stable social relationships. In conclusion, Malinowski clearly states his view of a functionalist approach to understanding culture, and there are such main features of his point of view on functionalism. First of all, culture is essentially an instrumental apparatus by which man is put in a position to better cope with the concrete, specific problems that he faces in his environment, in his society, in the course of the satisfaction of his needs and goals. And the second feature is that culture is a system of objects, activities and attitudes in which every part exists as a means to an end. And the third feature in the functionalist approach of Branislav Malinowski posits that culture is an integral in which the various elements are interdependent. So culture functions as a structure, as a system. And such activities, attitudes and objects are organized around important and vital tasks into institutions, such as family, the clan, the local community, the tribe, society, the organized teams of economic cooperation, political, legal and educational activity. And the last feature of a functionalist approach stresses that from the dynamic point of view, that is as regards the type of activity, culture can be analyzed into a number of aspects such as education, social control, economics, systems of knowledge, religious beliefs, and morality and ethical norms, and also modes of creative and artistic expression. So all these elements represent culture as a whole system and as a fundamental structure.